We told you we have a big new case to announce, and we are honored to be representing Turning Point USA and Charlie Kirk, an organization that has done incredible work with young people, high school students, college students, university students all across the country, teaching them about liberty and freedom and the ability to speak up and how to speak up and stand up. But we also know these groups, like so many others, individuals and organizations, have been attacked by social media companies, deplatformed, dethrottled. There's so many different shadow banning. We've heard all these terms. And it all goes back really to when we thought it was Russia doing this. And then the administration at the time, the Obama administration, and then the deep state under the Trump administration said, well, even if we can't prove it's the Russians, you know what? We'll just start blaming it on the American people. We don't want these American ideas out there. And so we started to see organizations with very big online platforms not being able to reach the people that follow them. We are, again, joined right now by Charlie Kirk, and we are representing, the ACLJ is representing Turning Point USA and Charlie in this legal battle. And Charlie, let me first ask you this. When did you first notice that all of your social media accounts, that you weren't getting the same reach that you used to?
So it really started to be significant right during the presidential election. And I think during this process, and by the way, thrilled to be working together, guys, we're going to get all the facts, right, through discovery and all this, because based on the documents that I already made public through Twitter files and through other FOIA requests, we know that the federal government was actively involved in suppressing Twitter accounts such as ours and many others. And there'll be more and more facts that come out, and it's illegal what the government did. But I started to see it in the presidential election where all of a sudden, you know, we were averaging 120 to 140,000 retweets a day, which is a fair amount. And according to Axios, we had the third or fourth largest Twitter account during the presidential cycle. And, you know, right in the middle of the 2020 election, all of a sudden we started to see that kind of taper off. And then it really hit post January 6th, which makes sense because, you know, after January 6th, all of a sudden this language started to get introduced. And obviously a new regime took the Oval Office where they considered my views and the views of half the country, and more than half the country, in my opinion, to be that of domestic violent extremism. And if you look at the DHS documents that have been made public and you look at the Twitter files, I was put on a do not amplify list on Twitter. That's a fact. And so what, you know, I want to know, and we're going to find out through this complaint and this process is, you know, decisively, in my personal opinion, is the federal government labeled my account and Turning Point USA and many others for censorship. And the federal government is not allowed to shut up the citizen. The federal government is not allowed to say that, you know, your First Amendment liberties and freedoms are quietly, you know, basically being shadow banned. And that's essentially what's happening here. Yeah. And who knows how many other people, but really Elon Musk is helping make this argument possible. I'm looking forward to working with you guys on this because with the Twitter files, we learned that there was government-private collusion to restrain my Twitter account that could have reached millions of more people and maybe even further influence the election for Donald Trump.
You know, it's interesting because the way this has worked is the Department of Homeland Security sent up these grants and went to the University of Dayton and other entities and some of these private organizations and then worked in cooperation with the Department of Homeland Security as if the Department of Homeland Security was trying to cast the blame for any censorship onto these groups, which is not going to work. And we're going to have a very aggressive lawsuit planned for this. But when you look at the list of organizations that were targeted, in addition to Turning Point USA, CB Christian Broadcasting Network, the Heritage Foundation, Fox News, and then you go up the list, you get into neo-Nazi groups. So, you know, Charlie, the thing that's happened here is the government, it appears, and I'm convinced through discovery, and I've been litigating these kind of cases for 40 years, we're going to find that the government put their hand on the scale. And they put the hand on the scale to tip it so that groups like yours and others would not have the voice that you already had earned in the marketplace of ideas. That's what's so important to emphasize here. You had that voice in the marketplace of ideas already, and then they were squelching it once you were trying to get your message out.
That's right. And it's illegal for the government to do that. The government is not allowed to pick and choose which voices they want to be heard more than others.
No, that's called viewpoint discrimination, which in 3 cases I argued to the Supreme Court and won unanimously, all 3 of them. So, and then the most liberal justice, most conservative. The most egregious form of discrimination on speech is when you shut down one viewpoint on an otherwise covered topic. But go ahead. But you're exactly right.
Yeah, and even further is they did it in a clandestine way, where you didn't really know it, and they called you conspiracy theorist if you said it. And we don't know how involved the FBI was. We know the DHS vector, but the FBI was having standing meetings with Yoel Roth at the Twitter office, and they were discussing, potential censorship activities. I lost access to my Twitter account because I tweeted about the Hunter Biden laptop for a whole week during the presidential election because they said it was Russian disinformation. And you have to wonder, how many other voices were suppressed and how many. Yeah. And so I think this is the complaint here. You guys do such a great job is going to be, really focused and precise. And I think this really needs to be a hallmark case where we put the government, and shine a light on how they have been actively involved in viewpoint discrimination. But my fear, guys, and this is why I think that this lawsuit is so timely and important, what's to prevent them from doing it during the 2024 election?
Nothing.
And so,
right now, except that's why we got to file this lawsuit, because they're going to be on notice, and that's what put them. Go ahead, Jordan.
Yeah, I remember when they got rid of Nina Jankowicz, they didn't really get rid of the disinformation board. They renamed it. They just called it something different, and now they don't want to put the focus on it anymore. They're not going to put the spotlight on it. They tried that failed, so they tried to move along. Nothing to see here. But Charlie, I think you hit on a really important point, which was there's people like you. You can take a stand. You've got a voice. There's groups like us. We've got our voice. We can take a stand. But how many more people who just gave up trying to utilize these platforms that could have reached their friends, their family, their network of that they could influence, especially when you talk about politics and people voting, and they've just said, you know what, I don't even want to use these systems anymore because they obviously they're working against me, or I don't want to get in legal trouble because of what I tweet, or because of my viewpoint, or because of the political candidate I support.
That's such a good point. This will be harder to prove in court, I think, but there's a mass demoralization component to this, which I think you're getting at, which is people that say, why even speak if my stuff is going to be shadow banned, right? And we were called conspiracy theorists for even introducing the idea of a shadow ban. The great work by James O'Keefe proved with undercover videos that Twitter was indeed shadow banning. But now to kind of complete the circle, was it the federal government that was pressuring the companies to shadow ban in the first place? And that's like, whoa, now you're at a whole nother level, that these companies were not acting independently. And it sort of makes sense because there was this mysterious change of behavior by a lot of these tech CEOs that used to present themselves as like free speech absolutists. If you read the early writings and musings of Dorsey and Zuckerberg, they were always, they were liberal, but they were like, we're going to die at the First Amendment.
Classic
pressured?
Liberalism. Right.
Exactly. Were they being pressured by the Leviathan with other regulatory action or just pure outright law enforcement?
Well, look, here's what you got, Charlie. We know this from other litigation we've had against the Biden administration recently. We know that James Baker, who was the general counsel of the FBI when the whole crossfire hurricane started against President Trump. So we know that James Baker ended up becoming the general counsel of Twitter. So when you ask the question of, how much were these tech companies involved, and it was Elon Musk who fired James Baker because Baker was putting the kibosh on the Twitter files being released, and Elon said, who is this James Baker? And they said, oh, he's the former general counsel of the FBI. So that not only do they have their finger on the scale, they were specifically targeting voices they disagreed with. And I'm not defending any tech company here either, by the way. But they were put in a really tough situation by the government. Let's not kid ourselves there. Go ahead, Jordan.
Yeah, because they've got immunity.
Right.
And that Section 230 immunity, they are so afraid of. But we've had Mark Zuckerberg went on the record and told Joe Rogan, the FBI came into him and said, you better shut down any of the laptop stories. And like you said, Charlie, once you put anything up about the laptop, it didn't matter if you were Charlie Kirk with millions of followers or the New York Post with hundreds of years of reporting the news, your account was shut down and you were shut out.
Yeah, and now we have, thanks to FOIA requests, which I know will be a major part of this, the DHS was doing block grants to continue the censorship regime, right? And as you guys know, through discovery and asking for documents and stuff, I think we're going to get a really interesting picture of the modern censorship Leviathan, right? How deep is this? How widespread? It seems as if they want to use the full force of the government to try, not to try to win the debate, but to make that there's no debate at all. And thankfully, we still have that, handy dandy United States Constitution that you guys at ACLJ have done a phenomenal job of actually defending for years, that a fair judge looking at this, with all the information put together, boy, the federal government is not allowed to shut up its citizens. We have explicit protections for that. Don't have to read beyond the First Amendment to get there.
Well, Charlie, it's an honor for us to represent you and TPUSA. We're going to get to the bottom of this. It's going to be aggressive litigation, but it's very, very important litigation. There's going to be more ahead. We appreciate it, Charlie. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much, guys. God
Thanks.
bless.